The United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon is to travel to Burma, where more than 2 million people are said to need help after the cyclone. Mr. Ban has made repeated attempts to contact the country's rulers, but his letters and calls have so far been ignored. But the Foreign Office Minister, Lord Malloch Brown, who arrived in Rangoon last night, has told the BBC he believes he's made progress in convincing Burma's military rulers to allow in more aid. In a BBC interview with Andrew Marr this morning, he said his visit was a sign that the Burmese authorities could be beginning to accept they need more outside assistance.
I think it's a remarkable thing, really. We have come in at very short notice, and I think it's evidence of the fact that the Burmese have accepted that indeed we come in the spirit of humanitarian assistance, that this is not about politics.
Have you been able to speak to any members of the regime yet?
Absolutely. We've met today with the line ministers who are dealing with the emergency in the Delta. I also delivered to them a letter for their number one leader, the senior leader, Che Shui, from Gordon Brown, insisting that this was a humanitarian enterprise and that we put politics aside to help the victims of the cyclone. And I think they're responding in kind and treating this on the terms we're offering it.
Mr. Brown has said, of course, that this is an intolerable situation and that the regime must be held to account for what they haven't done. Do you agree with that?
Yes, but I think, what we've got to do now is make sure that people are helped and need reaches them. And I think in that sense, from a standoff at the beginning where we wanted a classic relief operation with as many Western organizations as possible delivering as much help as we could, we found a middle ground where, through the leadership of the Asian neighbors such as India and China and the ASEAN countries like Thailand and Indonesia, in partnership with the United Nations, there is now a leadership which the Burmese can accept and we can work through to deliver our assistance.
Well, it certainly needs to, if the World Food Programme is right. They say that about 500,000 people, worst affected, still have had no food aid at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's correct that probably not more than about 25% of the caseload of 2 million or so who need help have so far received it. So there's a major need here. But, when I came in yesterday, I saw something that I thought I'd never see, which was American C-130s, military C-130s on the tarmac at Yangon Airport with their American pilots at their side, unloading relief supplies. And beside them were British planes that we had chartered, unloading shallow boats to use in the Delta to distribute aid across the rivers, unloading plastic sheeting because it still rains and people have no shelter. So this operation, while still running into all kinds of bottlenecks, many of them man-induced rather than natural, nevertheless is now starting to move.
Well, the leader of Burma's military junta has met victims of the country's devastating cyclone for the first time. More than 2 weeks since the storm hit, General Tan Shui visited relief camps near Rangoon. Burma says some 78,000 people have died since the cyclone, but aid agencies say many more may die without urgent help. And as you've been hearing, the Foreign Office Minister, Lord Malloch Brown, who arrived in Rangoon last night, says the aid operation had finally started to move, but only a fraction of those that needed help had got it. Powerful new evidence of the true extent of the suffering in Burma. A British medical relief team has recorded the desperate conditions, including water shortages and disease, in a country where 2 million people are now without enough food, shelter or medical aid. Today, the Foreign Office Minister, Malloch Brown, who's in Burma, said the aid operation had finally started to move, but only a fraction of those that needed help had got it. The aid agency Merlin travelled to the township of Labuta in the worst hit area of the Irrawaddy Delta and filmed what they found there. Andrew Harding reports.
A unique glimpse into Burma's misery. This is the Mong family, marooned in a sea of mud. They lost 13 relatives to the cyclone. Baby Amoth here was found alive, floating amongst the corpses. Her brother now catches rainwater to drink. This footage was taken by the British medical charity Merlin, which is working in Labuta, one of the worst hit corners of the Delta. tens of thousands here, stranded and homeless. Merlin's British staff keeping a video diary.
The monsoon has really hit this town with a vengeance now, and the people here are suffering more than ever. In conditions like these, acute diarrhea and pneumonia could become major killers in just a few days.
The weakest are already fading. An elderly man is brought to a makeshift clinic, gasping for breath. 2 Merlin doctors try to revive him, but without success. His grieving family watch him die. What better proof of the urgent task now facing the international community as it begs Burma's generals to open up? Today, a British envoy in Rangoon said he saw a hint of progress.
We've met today with the line ministers who are dealing with the emergency in the Delta. I also delivered to them a letter for their number one leader, the senior leader, Che Shui, from Gordon Brown, insisting that this was a humanitarian enterprise and that we put politics aside to help the victims of the cyclone. And I think they're responding in kind and treating this on the terms we're offering it.
In the Delta, aid from Britain gets through to the Merlin doctors. A child cries out as his infected wound is finally treated.
This is a very common thing we see after emergencies, that wounds are treated, but they're not properly disinfected or sterilised. And when that happens, it's almost certainty that the wound will break down and not heal properly.
Slowly, more people are getting outside help here. But all this should have happened 2 weeks ago. And every extra day is costing lives.
We can talk to Andrew. Andrew, Mark Mallet-Brown's predicting things may shift quite dramatically now. Is there any real evidence of that?
Not yet, no. And, you know, for the past couple of weeks, Emily, we've seen the outside world trying to shame Burma's generals into opening their doors. That hasn't worked. The British, the American, the French warships sitting off the coast, waiting with their aid and not being allowed in. But we are now seeing some signs that perhaps things could change slowly on the ground with a more diplomatic approach. That's why we're hearing that the UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon will be visiting Rangoon this week to try to push things forward with a more nuanced, persuasive line towards the generals. But of course, for the thousands, tens of thousands out in the Delta tonight, in the rain, out in the open, this is all much too little, much too late.
Burma is running out of time to save the lives of thousands of people left homeless without food and water. More than 2 weeks after Cyclone Nargis struck, Save the Children says 30,000 children could starve to death unless aid reaches them soon. The UN Secretary-General will travel to the country in the coming days to add his voice to the growing international pressure. Sarah Merchant reports.
She escaped the cyclone, but this is no life. Her husband is already dead, her 4-week-old baby is sick, and even if medical help is on its way, it may be too late.
We are very concerned that children, and particularly malnourished children, and we know that there were 30,000 of them even before the disaster struck in this region, are really vulnerable and may be facing death from starvation right now, and indeed this may increase dramatically in the days ahead if we can't get aid through to more children.
Food is finally reaching the desperate and the destitute in the Irrawaddy Delta. But where help is getting through, it's not from the government, but from private donors. Pressure is mounting on the reclusive military leaders to allow more access for international aid.
The Secretary-General has asked John Holmes to go to Myanmar today to work with the government to see how we can help them scale up their response. As we all know, this is critical, it's urgent, the needs on the ground aren't being met as quickly as they should be.
The UN estimates that fewer than 300,000 people have been reached by aid groups so far. And even those are crammed into makeshift camps existing on meagre supplies. As many as 2.5 million are still waiting for help, hoping that disease and starvation won't reach them first. Sarah Merchant, Sky News.